what they've been able to demonstrate is the single greatest determinant factor for health over the life course are relationships.
Welcome to Successful Living with Bill Nappick. Every week, we talk with interesting people in a variety of professions for ideas to enhance your success in all aspects of life. Successful Living with Bill Nappick starts right now. Here's Bill Nappick.
Welcome to the show. It is Successful Living, and today a special edition as we have our guest host, Dave Hite with Hite Tech Inspections. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Bill. I've got a great show for you today. I'm super excited to have my guest, Robert Hilliker. Dr. Robert Hilliker just recently got his doctorate and does a lot of work here in Houston and in the Houston area. Has a place called the Lovett Center here in the Montrose area, and then also has an inpatient facility out in LaGrange, and so does a lot of great work. Robert, tell us a little bit about your work and about who you are and a little bit of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all. And my experience in the field is really predicated first on being a patient. That's one of the things I'm really clear about, that I talk about a lot, is that I was a patient first. And that's always what informs how I think about patient care, is the patient experience. So I'm a clinical social worker by training. That's my master's degree, and my PhD is in clinical social work as well. Basically 9 years ago, we started the Lovett Center, a little over 9 years, almost 10 years ago now. We started the Lovett Center with my partner, Will Davis. And over time, over the last almost decade, that's grown into several things, which now is Ethos Behavioral Health Group. So that includes several locations across different levels of care and in 3 states. So we're actually in California, Texas, and Illinois.
Oh, fantastic.
And our facility in Round Top, Texas, close to LaGrange, but in Round Top, Texas,
in the general area,
in the general vicinity, is an 81.5 acre campus that's for men and women dealing with primary substance use issues that are looking for residential treatment.
I always think of LaGrange because there's this great restaurant out there, and it's called Dos Brisas. It's fabulous, and used to be not Michelin star rated, but Relais and Chateau, but I think they've closed down and gone a different direction now. So, how many actual therapists are here at the Lovett Center?
It's a great question, actually. At Lovett these days, during the pandemic, our business pivoted to be a virtual telehealth company almost overnight, right? So like 90% of our stuff went online. The only stuff that remained intact in person was medical detox and residential care.
Okay.
So we still have people that have continued to work virtually, and others that have come back into the space like we have.
Right.
Like we are now. We're working on my office. Total, we have close to about 150 employees for Ethos Behavioral Health Group, and here at Lovett, a big chunk of that delivering outpatient care and intensive outpatient.
Well, and I personally am a patient here. I do group work here. It's fabulous. Absolutely has been life-changing and life-altering. And so I can personally attest to how effective that it is here at the Lovett Center. But tell us a little bit about what you specialize in, and a little bit about the work that you do.
Yeah, happy to speak to that. So I've always worked with, I started out in the field working with adolescents and their families, and from that ended up training at the Miniger Clinic, did my postgraduate study there, and when I was there, I really shifted to focus on professionals, and that's really been sort of the bread and butter of my practice. I focus mainly on professional folks. I see a lot of attorneys, physicians, and stuff like that.
And guys like me who don't fit in that category.
Entrepreneurs
absolutely
who
are part of your practice, without a doubt.
I see a ton of entrepreneurs and self-employed people who've started companies and been really successful in that regard. People just like you and lots of other folks. the emphasis for a lot of my work, because of my background, has often been around substance use and co-occurring mental health conditions. So people that, before we got started, we were just talking about how many people actually come here and have substance use issues. And the national average for that is like 7 out of 10 people that walk through the front door probably have a co-occurring issue, meaning they have some kind of substance abuse or misuse, something like that's going on.
Okay.
Even if they came here with a presenting problem like depression or anxiety or some other thing that was what they were actually pursuing.
And is that something that you focus on, or it's just a natural occurrence because of the way that the practice has been built?
Both and.
Okay.
I think it would occur naturally, but it's especially of importance to me, given my family history and background around that. It feels really important that I treat people that have substance use issues and severe and persistent mental illness too. Yeah.
And the Prairie, the inpatient facility,
Yeah.
how large is that, and how long can people stay
Right.
for that kind of treatment?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's the facility itself, the campus is an 81.5-acre campus, and it's licensed for 30 beds, both men and women, adults. Though we're expanding that campus to include adolescent care, I hope in the next year, because the need is so tremendous for adolescent residential beds in the state of Texas. So we'll be expanding our care to include that, adolescents and their families. But right now it's focused on adults with primary substance use issues and co-occurring mental health conditions. And, you have free range of motion on the campus. It's not like a lockdown facility. It's not
You come and go as you please.
Well, you're there once you're in residential care. You're there with the exception of family visitation and things like that. You're a captive audience, so to speak.
Okay.
But but we do have people that are there for extended stays, take therapeutic absences and things like that.
And how long does the Prairie offer? If somebody wants to stay, can they stay a week, a month?
So this is actually kind of an interesting clinical innovation too, and we can talk about this for a second because I think it has relevance maybe even to some of the stuff we want to talk about as we get into some of these other topics. But average length of stay is somewhere closer to 45 days. Most people, will stay somewhere between 30 and 60. So, we split the difference, probably 45.
Okay.
But we've had people stay there as long as 9 months. When they have a long history of relapse and have really struggled and need that level of consistency and containment and support to really shore up some basic sobriety, longer lengths of stays are not totally uncommon for us. So most treatment, how it's structured, especially inpatient, like residential care for substance use, it's structured to be on kind of a 30-day treatment cycle. So if you stay for a longer period of time, let's say you stay for 45 days, then days 31 through 45
are like days 1 through 15.
Are days 1 through 15 on repeat.
Okay. So it's a 30-day structured program.
No, what I'm saying is ours is not.
Oh, yours is not.
I'm saying that most people, that's how it's structured.
Okay.
And the problem with that, right, is that people, and there are many people, listeners to this who will be able to attest to this directly, I'm sure. There's so many people who've gone to so many different treatments that they could literally teach, the lecture on addiction in the brain, and it hasn't been able to help them not use. So
which is part of what we're going to talk about today, and part of what I love about, and even our times together. Robert and I will have discussions that we're open to talking about anything and about how things could be different than what they are now.
Yes.
Because if you're finding something that's not working, you can't just keep doing it. That's the Einstein thing. I mean, what's the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. If you get there and the treatment isn't working, then there needs to be some type of differentiation in it in order to try something different. And that's one thing I love about Robert is he likes to think. And really get in, and I bring him some crazy ideas. I love to think about things. I'm like, Robert, let's talk about this. And so we'll get into some things, and like some of the things we're going to talk about today, like how is it possible that depression is a process that was created by evolution, and if it was, then how would that differentiate how we look at it? Because evolution is, as said, there's a purpose to this.
Yeah.
And if it has a purpose,
Right.
then you would have to treat it differently.
Right.
So that is one thing I really enjoy about this in particular. Your treatment is
Yeah.
you are looking at being cutting edge, and if the traditional things aren't working, let's
Right.
think about why and figure something else out.
And you know, that's so the vision that I have carried and that my partners have carried in this business has been around challenging the status quo related to patient care. So many of the things, like even the constructs for how therapy is conducted, is sort of a farce. I mean, it's you know, the 50-minute therapy hour. It's like, well, why is that? Because it's a billable unit of time. There's no indication that 50,
that's the most
that
effective
50
way to do
minutes
it.
is the most effective, right? Versus 45 or 57 or 63
Or 26 weeks,
or 26.
Absolutely.
Right? But-
It's interesting that the actual therapy was constructed around the billability
yeah.
of it, not around. I never really
Right.
thought about that, but these
Right.
are the kind of thoughts that we have.
Right,
Is 50
Right.
minutes is billable and it's lovely, but is it effective? And that's the kind of questions
Right.
that we enjoy
Because
asking.
the 50-minute therapy hour allows you to deliver a billable service, a billable unit of time, and then still go to the bathroom and get some water
Before the
between
next one.
patients.
And it's so funny if you've ever done therapy. It is 50 minutes. They're like, oh, hey, great talking to you. Sorry, but yeah, save that for next week.
Well, I hope it doesn't feel like that when I'm working with people, but so a couple of thoughts about that, like even in that vein, right? The first would be, like I'm saying, challenging the status quo. We did that with treatment. How is it that we could create continuity of care between levels of care, where someone would go from medical detox and residential down to partial hospital programming, intensive outpatient, and ongoing outpatient care, but still have clinical continuity, right? So what happens traditionally is you stay for 45 days and you get the first 15 days on repeat. That's what happens
Okay,
traditionally.
okay.
And then you step down into an IOP,
Yep.
and you're getting more of the same.
Interesting. That
And
you
so-
were getting during the 30 days
and
cycle.
so what would be more of a deterrent to long-term recovery than just having people who already feel like they've given up something that was really fun and exciting for them? Not always, but a lot of people still have that.
Absolutely.
that
Can feel that
connection
way, right? I
to
don't want to
that
give up
pull
drinking
to-
or whatever
yeah.
it is.
And then you're like, so just sit in this lecture that you've already heard again, and also don't drink. And you're like, so sobriety has to have a better appeal than drinking, which is a tall order, because
Very true.
drinking's a
Very
really
true.
pleasurable experience. So how do you have a more pleasurable experience of recovery? So anyway, fast forward, what I did was we created a 10-chapter experiential workbook called The Pilgrimage.
Okay.
So it takes people, imagines that every person coming into treatment is encountering their own sacred pilgrimage, and instead of it being largely explanatory, it's largely experiential.
Exploratory.
So we're
Instead of-
asking them.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're not giving them information. We're asking questions that facilitate exploration.
So you would say it's more instead of being explanatory, it's exploratory.
exploratory,
And
correct.
it's about
Yeah.
we want you to help you find your answers rather than here's
Right.
the answer.
So some of my favorite, I'm blanking on her. Hannah Levinson is her name, out of the Wright Institute in Berkeley. She says she has this wonderful quote where she says, "People are more stuck than they are sick, and they're more in need of
Interesting.
an experience than they are an explanation."
Okay.
Right. And
Definitely
that's another
different.
traditional model that treatment has sort of gotten wrong historically. Is that,
here it is. X,
Here's this.
Here's what's
here's
going
an
on.
explanatory model, but not actually creating an experience of transformation in which someone encounters change. So we do the 10-chapter pilgrimage experience, and then we go into a 52-week skills cycle that's basically has 4 seasonal arcs. The winter is all about intrapsychic development, spiritual exploration, things like that.
Okay.
The springtime is about interpersonal development.
Okay.
The summer
Growth.
is an
Perfect.
existential kind of exploration of meaning and purpose and all of that. And the fall, where we usually have more exposure to family, is all about family and systemic, systems and things like that.
And do you follow? Is it actually 52 weeks?
It's 52 weeks.
If you start, say, June, then you start in the summer model. Okay, so it's actually done during the season, so that
Yeah.
you're connecting the season with the experience
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah,
And
then you can go through all the levels of care and see somebody through an entire year of recovery, right? The first year of recovery, which
Okay.
we know is
Which
an
is
important part
always
of
difficult,
creating
always.
sustained change. And when we do that and we see them through the first year, they've never seen a repetition of content. So they're not bored out of their mind going,
Right.
this is awful. We got
this
to
is
get
the
out of here.
23rd time that I've heard this. Thank you again
Right,
for repeating
right,
something
right.
mantra to me. I love it. We're on location here at the Lovett Center with Dr. Robert Hilliker. I'm Dave Hite, sitting in for Bill. So I really want to talk about our discussion on depression. I mean, depression has become such a big issue in our society,
Sure.
and there's been these models to treat it. But you and I have been talking about what if we believe, we've been taught that evolution helps to create things, refine things, it eliminates things, it brings things in, it creates things, it promotes things, and when and that is it possible that depression actually has a meaning wherewith until you fulfill that meaning, it's just going to be an issue for you. We've gone at it from a therapeutic model of let's use medicine to and we're not talking about those being bad. We're not talking about eliminating those.
No.
We're talking about for example, if depression and meaning seem to have an opposite pole in someone's life. It's hard to have a lot of meaning in your life and be depressed.
Yeah.
And is it possible that depression is a symptom of something lacking in your life that somehow the universe or God or whatever you believe in is pulling you towards, and that is a path to lead you to that? And I know we've had those discussions, so I'd like to talk a little bit about that and about depression and how you treat it, and if depression was from a lack of meaning, how would that be? How would we treat it differently and look at it differently?
Yeah, so let's so before we get into that, let's back up and think about all the different ideas that have been posited about depression.
Love that, absolutely.
So first and foremost, if we go back to just like kind of the basis for contemporary psychiatry, right? Psychiatry, and I have wonderful colleagues who are psychiatrists. I'm not dogging psychiatry. There's this old joke about the clinical social worker, the clinical psychologist, and the psychiatrist,
right,
all observing the same patient. And then they all sit down afterwards. They've all evaluated the patient, and the psychiatrist says, well, of course, they need such and such medication.
Exactly,
and the clinical psychologist
absolutely.
says, I'm not so sure we need to do more testing, because psychologists love to do testing. And and the social worker says, I'm pretty sure that if we got her, if we dealt with food scarcity, childcare, and some other basic needs, like all these other things would go away.
Right.
Right. So there's a very practical context for that. I come from that. That's my clinical background and training, is to think not just about people in a sort of mechanistic metaphor, like the body's a machine, and if we fix the machine, then if we fix the cog in the wheel, then the whole thing works. Which is sort of the positivist philosophical tradition that is medicine. But if you look at it maybe in a more expansive way, we can contextualize every person in their environment. We can think about, a person doesn't exist in a bubble. They exist in a culture, in a society, so you have to take individual stuff, whatever might be going on biologically with someone into account, certainly. But you also need to think about their interpersonal world. What kind of support do they have? What we know, interestingly, is if people have adverse child, this comes from the work of Bruce Perry, who's a local trauma psychiatrist who focuses on and specializes in research with trauma. They looked at these big meta-analyses where they say, look, there's all these adverse childhood experiences a person can have: abuse, neglect, exploitation, divorce, early death of a parent, incarceration of a parent, etc. all these awful things that can occur to a person. As you might imagine, the more of those things that you have, the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the more on this other axis you're stacking up co-occurring health conditions, not just mental health, not just
Absolutely.
like
Things that
health
manifest
conditions.
themselves physically.
Physically, that's right.
Absolutely.
So much so that you could, and this is a fascinating thing, the single greatest determinant for health over the life course, based on these major meta-analyses of meta-analyses, these are big data, big generalizable data.
The analyzation of the big data of the big data.
Right.
Gotcha.
Right. So they what they've been able to demonstrate is the single greatest determinant factor for health over the life course are relationships. A poverty,
like interpersonal relationships with your friends, your family, your spouse, that kind of thing.
Yep. And you don't need to have tons of them. We're not talking about social media relationships, 1,000 friends on Facebook or
Deep,
something
meaningful,
like that.
in-person,
You need 1 to
connected.
2, at least, really deep connections, right?
And that will, you're saying that will improve your physical health if you
So
have
much so.
1 or 2 deep connections,
Right.
spiritually and intellectually and psychically.
So much so that literally.
Interesting. And it's only 1 or 2. I mean, you're not talking about.
No, I'm not talking about tons. So a poverty of relationships, which is the research terminology for it, is a greater predictor of health outcomes than poverty itself. That's a huge deal.
Interesting. Is
Yeah,
that right? And
that's
so,
right.
so what you're saying is that people with a best friend
Yeah.
are going to be healthier on.
I mean, barring other co-occurring issues, certainly that would be the case. Like, so much so that relationships, if you've got strong relationships, you are, you're 12 times more likely to have heart disease if you have a poverty of relationships than if you're a smoker. And smoking is like a great predictor for heart disease as a
Say that
connected-
one more time. You're
So
12 times
you're 12
more
times
likely.
more likely to have heart disease if you have a poverty of relationships than if you're a smoker. You're 4 times more likely to have diabetes.
Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
So-
It is amazing how interconnected things really
Yes.
are.
Yes.
And we look at them. We've looked at them, and we've just gone through a big thing with the pandemic. We've looked at everything through the eyes of pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Now there's a shift going, because everything has greatness to it,
Yeah.
and everything has limitations. I think we're running
Yeah.
up on. We've spent decades now.
Yeah.
Focusing on pharmaceuticals, and now we're finding the limitations of those pharmaceuticals.
And it's not just to focus on pharmaceuticals. That's been one piece of it. And, I mean, you could get into this is a whole long discussion, really,
Of course
on
it
its
is.
own
Which
accord
ours
about,
tend to be long because we like to think and go in crazy directions.
Because what you really have to bring up is the fact that, the DSM, right, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM-5, is published by the pharmaceutical industry.
Is
right?
that true?
Yeah.
You're kidding me. So the
No,
pharmaceutical
that's who
industry has actually published how we're supposed to treat
Sure.
people with mental illnesses.
Now, yes. Now, of course, there are many, many, many experts who are involved in that process, but even that process, right, is fraught with all sorts of problems because, again, it's a categorical model based on a threshold of symptoms. So even if I put so let's say if you've got something that's you've got a personality disorder and there's 9 characteristics to that, you need to have 5 of the 9.
To be
meet
considered
criteria.
that you have it.
But if you had 4 of the 9, you might still have an impact that doesn't meet clinical criteria for that. And, by the way, 5 out of 9, the various combinations or permutations of that means that there's 256 ways to have that disorder. So all that
Interesting, because
all
of the
that
combinations.
diagnosis really means is that we're in the ballpark of what's happening.
Okay,
right?
well, fantastic. That is super, super interesting. We're going to continue this conversation on the other side of our break. Again, we are here at the Lovett Center with Dr. Robert Hilliker. I'm Dave Hite, standing in for Bill Napick. We will be back in just a second.
At Hite Tech, their motto is great inspections, great customer service, and giving back. They want to make sure their clients receive the best inspection in the industry by using all the latest technology available today to ensure a new home buyer has all the information they need to make an informed decision about their home purchase. They have the most updated infrared to detect hidden water leaks, electrical malfunctions, and missing insulation, as well as moisture meters that can detect moisture 2 to 3 inches beyond the surface to find hidden moisture in the structure. They also have water, Wi-Fi cameras so they can perform a roof inspection even in the rain. Every foundation is measured with the best altimeter to check for variations that could indicate foundation issues. They even have a drone that can go under pier and beam houses so they can see the entire underside of the structure. After performing the inspection, they meet with every client to go over the findings so you can ask questions about anything they found. And they also talk about maintaining your home. Their promise to you is they will never leave until all of your questions are answered. Their reports are easy to read and include pictures and videos of all the important items in your house. They also work with your agent to help prioritize the important items on the report. At Hite Tech, they want to make sure you have the best experience in the industry if you choose to use them for your home inspection. And they are there with you as long as you own your home. As long as you own the home Hite Tech inspected, you can send a picture or video of anything going on with your home, and they will give you a free, unbiased opinion about what is happening and tell you who you need to call to address the problem. You'll also be supporting many local projects to help veterans and underprivileged people in the Houston area. If you need a home inspection, call Hite Tech first at 832-477-0367 or schedule on the web at HiteTechInspections.com. That's HITE techinspections.com. You'll be glad you did.
And we are back. We are on location here at the Lovett Center with Dr. Robert Hilliker talking about depression and his practice and how he's gotten to his practice. We left off, Robert, talking about the DSM and how that was actually facilitated by the pharmaceutical companies. So let's go back and pick up where we stopped.
And I don't want to be unnecessarily harsh on that. I just, I think, that is the benchmark for how we think about diagnosis in our field, but there's lots of problems with it. And I think, like I talked about, the only way towards progress is to challenge the status quo, to say, like, what's a better model, right? What's a better way to think about this?
What's not working in that model?
Right.
Everything I've had in my life, I've gone through and I've gotten the good out of it. But when you get the good out of it, when you mine it to a certain point, then you find where it falls short. It's not that it's not a good process.
Right.
It's that it doesn't. Well, for example, aspirin. Aspirin's great for a headache, but it's not going to help you heal a cut.
Right.
So everything has a yin and a yang, which it has its benefits, and then it has its limitations.
Sure.
And once you use a model for a certain period of time, you are going to find its limitations, and that's where innovation comes in, which is where you are trying to lead, which is where we try to lead when Hite Tech in our home inspections. We're looking for the innovation to the next level of home inspection, better customer service. How can we serve that, the customer better in their home inspection? You're doing the same thing in clinical treatment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And, so where we left off talking about depression, I think, is such a valuable, part of the discussion, where you brought this question forward, which is, if there was an evolutionary benefit to depression, what would it be?
Yes,
why is it here? And obviously it's a big if there was an evolutionary benefit. But let's play with that idea. If there were an evolutionary benefit, why would it exist? What is it? And in Jungian psychology, the depth psychology perspective is always looking at the shadow, not just the golden parts, but the shadow. Why?
Absolutely.
And so James Hollis has said when the dark and shadowy figure appears.
James Hollis, my favorite.
Yeah, that's right. One of my kind of
absolutely loves James Hollis.
One of my academic crushes, for sure,
without a doubt.
And so one of the things that he says is that we go back into our dreams and we say, why has this shadowy figure come for us? What is this here for? And so if we ask that question of depression, why have you come for me?
Absolutely.
Right? Why have you come for me? Then, I think the resounding response to that is surrounding the idea of meaning. And which is not to say that everyone's experience of depression can be cured by finding a meaningful experience in life. I think there is benefit to medication intervention in particular scenarios and things like that. But for people who have had sort of a low-grade fever depression, especially, something where it's just this sort of dull ache that doesn't get better, a lot of the times when they come to therapy, what we're looking at is where can we facilitate a greater sense of meaning and purpose in their experience? And that, to me, is where our culture has sort of gone astray. We're so interested in people being happy.
Absolutely. Happiness and entertainment, which do not produce meaning.
No, happiness is really, happiness is a fleeting mood state, but it's also a byproduct of a meaningful experience.
Absolutely,
so
it is.
Happiness
Without
is going
a
to be
doubt.
an outcome, but not the goal in and of itself.
You cannot just produce happiness just to produce happiness. Happiness is produced as a result of some other process, and yet somehow we focused on happiness itself as the goal, and it doesn't seem to be fulfilling that goal. I know I love to be happy. I think happy is fun, but if I really think about it, when I'm happiest is when I've accomplished a goal, when something of meaning happens in my life, when someone around me accomplishes a meaningful goal.
Sure.
Happiness, but then it's not permanent. I've not found a way to sustain it on its own. It's always been a byproduct of something else. And, and the whole discussion for me started with, is it possible that when we get wounded, that's a journey that the universe has asked us to go on, and that it then puts this emotional spike in our lives, and until we learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn, it's going to continue to be there. But once it's learned, we get to move on.
Sure.
Could depression be that kind of thing? That it is an indicator of something that evolution or the universe or God or whatever you believe in has created, so that we'll look inside. Because one thing I know depression definitely does is it gives you a mental focus that is difficult to accomplish on your own without depression. Pain does the same thing.
Sure.
Pain focuses us so definitively that it almost is all we can think about. Well, there has to be a purpose, and pain certainly we know has a purpose. Is depression psychic pain, just like physical pain, going, hey, there's something to pay attention to here?
Mm-hmm. I think there's something to that, absolutely, right? So, but again, we live in a culture that says you shouldn't have any pain.
Right, should be painless. Existence should be painless, which has never been a reality. And that was a wonderful way that we created this opioid epidemic that we now have. How did we get away from no pain, no gain to we should have no pain?
Well, interestingly, there's some people that say it's that little Likert scale with the smiley face and the sort of aggrieved face, that little pain scale that we started to implement.
Okay.
And everybody felt like we should be happy all the time. But there's a whole lot that's been written about that, about how we have our our thinking about pain has actually facilitated, sort of the opioid crisis in the way that it is now, that we shouldn't be in pain at all, and we should never have pain.
Pain is to be managed rather than the sources. Then healing and management are definitely a different thought process and a different. We're here with Robert Hilliker on site at the Lovett Center with Dr. Robert Hilliker, talking about depression and how, if it has a purpose in our treating it, then we need to change some of our clinical ways that we're looking at it and actually find the meaning. And could depression actually be a path to deeper meaning in our lives?
Yeah, and so any number of things can be a pathway towards deeper meaning. And usually, and this is sort of what you were speaking to a moment ago about, it's not only depression. It could be substance use, it could be whatever. You described it as wounding. And I believe that every person that encounters an experience of necessary wounding can transform that wound into a gift. That's the alchemy of recovery, right? The alchemy of therapy and this process.
Your biggest issue can be your biggest blessing.
Right. The way that you turn lead into gold.
You know what I love about that thought is there's hope in that.
Yeah.
If I come to you and I say, Robert, da 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 da, and you're like, well, you're going to have this forever. We're just going to have to fight to live with this. That's not a super hopeful message. That's never the message that I would want to hear. I prefer if it's real. Now, and if we know it and if we have knowledge of it, I prefer, hey, you're going to get through this. You're going to get it'll make you stronger. There's an answer to this.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard. It's just when you go to the gym, the only way to build muscle is to injure the muscle. You are actually taking the muscle fibers and injuring them, and then they rebuild better. Is it possible that that we psychically work that way as well? That injury is a place where we need strengthening. I know for me that is I could definitely look through my life and go, that injury definitely led me to a strength that I now exhibit that I would not have even known I needed to have.
Sure.
At that point.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying about transforming the wound into a gift. Ram Dass talks about the idea that, my karma is my dharma, right? My greatest suffering can be thought of as my greatest teaching. And that's where you talked about hope, but hope exists in this constellation, in this dialectic with despair. That we're not talking about hope in spite of despair, but actually hope because of despair.
Absolutely. Totally different thought process.
Yeah, which is a totally different idea.
And I have found that the way I think about suffering changes my experience of suffering. And if I think about that suffering, this has a purpose, it has a meaning, and that it's bringing something greater into my life, that suffering is not as difficult to deal with as if I try to avoid suffering, that suffering grows.
Yep.
And that suffering becomes bigger and more difficult to carry. But if I relax, and that is more of an Eastern thought process, is that suffering actually has meaning. But if I will adopt that.
I don't even know that that's exclusive to sort of Eastern philosophy. I mean, if you think about, I was just talking about this earlier this week with somebody who was speaking from sort of a Christian faith perspective, which is the predominant kind of worldview, here in the United States still. Although the fastest growing population is spiritual but not religious. But that, there's still this predominant kind of Christian faith orientation. Yeah, there's this predominant faith orientation around Christianity, and even in that faith perspective, you could say the whole story of Jesus is the idea of suffering giving way to salvation.
Absolutely,
that suffering is an important part of a process of
resurrection,
redemption,
absolutely,
and change.
And that death is a part of resurrection, and that we see death and resurrection all around us all the time. I mean, a tree, dies, and then the seedling comes up, and so I think it's an important concept to really think about.
Yeah.
And if we can embrace suffering, and embrace it and turn it into a positive, I think that would be, that certainly in my life has been something that's been super effective.
Yeah.
And I look at depression, and I can tell you where my thought process when I came and talked to you about it is I want there to be hope.
Yeah.
I don't want us to subscribe people. Hey, Robert, I know you're depressed. It's going to be this way all your life. We're going to give you a little medication. It's going to make it a little better, but it's really not going to get better. That to me is not a message of hope. A message of hope is hey, there's meaning here. If we'll work through this, if you're willing to do the work and the struggle, which struggle is always going to be a part of healing and getting better. You cannot disconnect those two things from moving towards the positive.
Yeah.
And so that to me is a much better meaning. Now tell everyone how they can get a hold of you. I'm going to tell you personally, if you are struggling with addiction, if you're struggling with some things interpersonally in your life, in your marriage, you should absolutely call the Lovett Center, because it is they're a great group. They do lots of good. But tell the audience how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, the best way is, a lot of people these days now want to find us on the internet, and so we welcome you to come and check out all of our services. The best way to learn about the family of all of our programs would be Ethos B, as in boy, Behavioral Health Group, ethosbhg.com. So ethosbhg.com will give you a contact number, and it will give you information about all the services available across our whole system of care.
And they're quite large. So if you're struggling with something, you should absolutely give them a call. So let's get back into, the discussion about the depression. And if that was true, and again, we're only looking for better answers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're just on an exploratory mission.
Yeah.
If that were true, how would the treatment differ?
Yeah.
On depression?
Well, for starters, we would not only approach it with psychopharmacology, but we would have a combined treatment strategy that includes talk therapy, but not just talk therapy in what has become the more predominant aspect of talk therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which again is a wonderful technique and approach to care, but it often just looks at symptom reduction. And the question that you're asking is really a question oriented around depth. So if we reduce the symptoms but don't understand the causes and conditions, then what will happen? The symptoms will recur.
They will.
So what we want to do is not just address things at the level of symptoms, at the level of symptom reduction. We want to understand, why is that there? Why has this dark shadow been cast on my life, and what is it about? And that's where I think we can take the deep psychic dive to find to answer these questions about meaning and purpose in our lives, about a vision and a mission, and also a hope and a future. And I think hope really is consistent. I've done a ton of human subject research on hope, and if there was a big takeaway about it, not only does it exist in relation to despair, so what I said earlier, we find hope in the valleys of our lives. They are the low points that run the risk of being flooded, but also provide the richest soil. So hope is found in the valleys. So those dark spaces, the hero's journey is a descent into darkness.
Absolutely.
Where a person has a transformational experience that facilitates new
understanding.
If
you'll read and study the greatest people in history, every one of them had events in their life that were difficult and traumatic. I mean, it built a strength into them. And if any of our fellow group members are listening, this is what I keep talking about in our group. I want to get to the cause, the root, not the symptom. We spend some time talking about the symptom. The root takes care of the issue. Mm-hmm. The symptom, you can deal with it, but then you just deal with it on a recurring basis. And in depression, we've chosen to treat the symptom. And by looking at it in a different way, if we could find the causation or the reason, it would be much more effective in actually dealing with it rather than, hey, and again, we're not saying medication can't be effective and helpful. That's not what we're saying here. But it's also has proven to not be the answer. It doesn't solve.
It's not curative.
It is not curative. If we can get down to the level below that and look at, again, evolution. If evolution has created this or allowed it or whatever the word you want to use, then it has come through the net of evolution with a reason. Yeah. And there should be something of value there that if we'll discover that could actually take care of the issue, not just treat the symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just coming back to this idea of hope as well, because I think it's such an important piece. All the human subject research around hope that I found, one of the most effective things is the idea that hope is consistent of three parts, that we have meaningful goals. There's that meaning word again.
Absolutely.
That we have meaningful goals, that we find creative pathways forward in our life, and that we have some sense and some restored sense of personal agency. That's a belief in our ability to affect change in our own lives. And if you think about what mental illness does, what substance use does, it undermines our personal agency.
Absolutely.
It takes away our ability to feel like we have a pathway forward. It robs us of meaningful goals in our life, and it undermines our personal agency, leaving us hopeless. So one of the more protective factors against depression is going to be cultivating hope in the form of finding meaning,
Yes.
Finding creative pathways forward in life and restoring your belief in your ability to affect change and a new outcome in
Which
your
is
life.
antithetical to the pleasure principle with which a lot of society works on. We want to run after pleasure. Pleasure, and I'm not, look, I love pleasure.
Yeah.
Not saying anything against pleasure.
Yeah.
But when that becomes the focus,
Right.
then pleasure does not create meaning. Meaning is something much more deep and fulfilling than pleasure, and I love pleasure. I think it's great, but it's like the candy of food. I mean, it's lovely. I mean, a great chocolate bar is certainly fantastic sometimes, and some Nutella on a banana with some honey roasted peanut butter and some whipped cream with a cup of decaf coffee. Fabulous. I'm not in any way against pleasure.
I was with you right up until you said decaf coffee. I don't.
Well, I like it in the evening. So if I do decaf coffee in the evening, then I'm up the rest of the night.
All right.
But I love that. But I can't sustain my body on that.
Right.
I must sustain my body on good, healthy food and exercise. Exercise, nutrition, and then of course your psychic affects that as well, which is kind of interesting. I never knew if you had one or two super meaningful relationships in your life, then you will physically feel better.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a protective factor. The most important protective factor for health over the life course, right, is strong social ties. So, if we have hope that can be born out of despairing and difficult situations, if we can cultivate meaningful lives, if we can cultivate meaningful relationships, right, I think we're way more apt to be firing on all cylinders and probably be much more positioned for not only longevity, but a fulfilling and meaningful life together.
Well, and I think we talked about happiness, and I love to be happy, but being peaceful can be sustained. Happiness I've never found to be sustained, and that meaning makes a big difference in my life. When I look at my life and I think about the things of real meaning, there's a peace and a contentment that happens. And I never really knew that then flooded into the actual physical aspect. But it makes sense because when your mind is peaceful, and we know the effects of stress, and stress is solely in your mind. I mean, you can see three people in the same situation. One of them is just freaking out. The other one's, keeping their stuff together, and the third one's like, "Hey, man, it'll be okay." And it is amazing when I allow stress to come in. It is amazing how health seems to take a step out. And stress is all in my mind. We've talked about that quite a bit. That stress only exists?
Yeah. I mean, people can have environmental stressors for sure. Whether that's health conditions, experience of trauma, things like that. I mean, there can be external factors associated with stress, but the way your approach to it, or what you're sort of speaking to, is more that sort of what we've talked about with Viktor Frankl. Like, one of the things he writes about is, you can take everything from a person. You can put them in a concentration camp. You can take their family,
everything, their food, their clothing.
But you cannot tell them how to feel about it.
Yes.
And they still have, and what he was able to really determine is that he was able to be the person who could make meaning of his experience, even in the midst of tremendous and overwhelming tragedy. And so that's sort of coming back to that idea of agency, that we can have, as one of my colleagues and a mentor of mine, John Allen, said, you can have agency in the midst of illness.
Absolutely true. And you know what interests me
an important path
is
forward.
that there were three specific paths psychology, and that was one they didn't pick, was Viktor Frankl's search for meaning. His did not become the most prevalent of the three. And it interests me why that, because his was born out of such a difficult, if you never read it, it's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's a classic. You should get it. You should absolutely read it, especially if you're struggling with depression and a lack of meaning in your life. It would definitely greatly benefit you. But it interests me that they chose Freud over Frankl.
Well, yeah,
And
I
Freud
mean,
has some great things. I'm not saying there's not greatness there.
yeah, no. I mean, Freud preceded Frankl by some time, and Jung was another kind of disciple of Freud. All of it was really born out of Freud, which interestingly, like we were talking about, the whole evolution, the origin of psychology, right? Which we've lost the psyche part of psychology for the most part, which is soul.
Without a doubt.
you know,
Soul
but-
being that part.
But
absolutely.
But the origin of psychology, Freud was a neurologist. He was a trained physician, and what he was attempting to do was understand anomalous situations, basically how people had neurological conditions without neurological, they had neurological symptoms with no neurological basis for their symptoms, right? How is it that I have right side paralysis but no neurological condition that would warrant that, right? So he was studying anomalous conditions. That's how, anomalies are how he made a serendipitous discovery that created modern psychology. And in the same way, we're trying to ask, I think, questions where we're saying, what's the part that doesn't fit in this? If all these people are helped by medication intervention, but these people are not, what's the part that's not helped?
Right.
And how do we understand
Absolutely.
that? Right. And if all we're doing is dealing with symptoms, are we missing a big piece of the causes and conditions part? And I think those are the kind of critical questions we have to continue to ask in the field of psychology, as well as putting the psyche back in psychology, which
Without
is
a
to say
doubt.
an exploration of the human soul and the spirit and people's experience in life and their attempt to find meaning. A lot of times that gets left out of contemporary approaches to psychotherapy.
Well, and I think it's a pretty good reflection too, because what we're doing is we're not saying the things that we're not saying moving on devalues where we came from. We're not devaluing Freud.
No.
And I think that's something that happens in our society. We're like, well, that's no longer, after you found all of the value in it and you move along, but you could have never gotten to that value
Right.
without that building block being in there. So
Sure.
the building block is valuable. You can't take it away just because you're
Sure.
now able to move beyond it. And we do that even in our history type of thing. We're like, well, that history's bad. No, the history isn't bad. The history is part of the building blocks of where we've gotten to today.
Right.
And so same thing in psychotherapy. I mean, Freud was an important part. I love Frankl, I love Jung, but they couldn't have started beyond where they were at.
Sure.
Because they got there through the teachings of Freud, and now we're looking at different things. So this has been a
absolutely.
great talk. I certainly have super appreciated it. I've enjoyed it, Robert. Always
Yeah,
enjoy
absolutely.
our talks together.
No, I appreciate it.
I never know where they're going to go.
Yeah.
Or where they're going to end.
Yeah, they could go all over the place, but I appreciate the opportunity to come and sit and speak about this stuff together, because this is the stuff that really excites me, and I think a lot of people are interested in these questions about finding meaning in life. So thank you for taking the time to do it.
Robert, before we go, let's remind everyone of your areas of expertise and the clients and how you can help them in what areas that you specialize in.
Yeah, so personally, I specialize in working with professionals that have substance use and co-occurring mental health conditions. But at Ethos Behavioral Health Group, we can serve people regardless of their level of care needs. So we do medical detox, residential care, partial hospital programming, intensive outpatient, supportive outpatient, and general outpatient. So we really have all the gamut of clinical services covered for men and women, adults and children. Adolescents, all of it. So,
and if you're looking for a path to health, this is where Robert is fantastic. If you want to better your life and become more, not stay stuck where you're at, that's what the Ethos specializes in. Tell everyone how they can get in touch with you if they
the best way to
you.
reach us online, it would be ethosbhg.com, and you'll see the whole family of services that we have and all the levels of care.
Excellent.
ethosbhg.com.
Once again, Dr. Robert Hilliker, absolutely. And again, this is Dave Hite sitting in for Bill Napick. We will see you again next week. Thank you for listening and have a great week. I mean, it goes so fast, doesn't it?
I know, it does.
I mean, it just you.
If you need a home inspection, call Hite Tech first at 832-477-0367 or schedule on the web at HiteTechInspections.com. That's HITE techinspections.com. You'll be glad you did.
Bill Nappick has produced another show, Successful Living with Bill Nappick, one of the most unique programs of its kind. Sundays from 6 to 7 p.m. on AM 950 KPRC. Successful Living with Bill Nappick. Go to radiobill.net for more info.